We're going to do this Machiavelli exercise. Machiavelli. Now, I don't know if you ever heard this guy, but he's famous for having this idea that in order to get ahead in business or get ahead even in your personal relationships or with anybody, you can't be completely honest, he says, because you need to use deception and manipulation in order to pursue power and influence. Okay. Now I want to see if you how much you agree with this guy. Um, Sometimes we think, well, you shouldn't be completely open and honest, otherwise others can take advantage of you. Now there's some truth to that, right? I mean, there's a lot of scammers these days, and we can't trust everyone. And there's a lot of people that we can't trust. So certainly we can't be completely open and honest with everyone. On the other hand, if you're not open and honest, then people can't trust you. And if you don't have trust in business relationships and in personal relationships, well, that's not very good. So we want to advocate trust as doing business ethically. But let's see how you. I'm going to give you 12 statements here. So I'm going to have you give you 12 statements, and these are statements that Machiavelli agreed to. And I want to see how much of you agreed to it. So what I want you to do is keep track of how many agrees. So out of 12 statements, let's say you may say, well, I agree with 7 of them, okay? Because I'm going to give you a score based on how many agrees that you have, okay? So let's take these one by one. Let's start with the first one here. I'll give you a first statement here. All right. Do you agree or disagree? Never tell anyone the real reason you did something unless it's useful to do so. So if you do something, you don't tell. You can sometimes lie about why you did it. Is that you agree with that? Okay. Anyone else? Only got 11 responses. Can some other people respond? 12. So I like a little more. Just pick A or B. You agree. Never tell anyone the real reason you do something unless it's useful. So you hide information, basically. You're willing to hide information unless it's useful. Okay. All right. So keep track. If you agree with this one, just keep track of that. All right. Okay. I'll publish the result. 14. Anyone else? Last chance. Okay. All right. So here's what I've got for 14 responses. All right. So more of you agree with that statement. Okay. So if you agree, keep track. That's one agree. All right. Let me go to the next statement here. The best way to handle people is to tell them what they want to hear. That's how you operate. The best way to tell them what they want to hear, right? A few more responses. I've got 17. A few more. Okay, so let me show you out of 17. There you go. Okay, more of you agree. All right, that's fine. Keep track of your agrees. If you agree so far, you've got 2. All right, 2 agrees. Third one. It is safest to assume that all people have a vicious streak and it will come out if given a chance. You agree or disagree? In other words, people are pretty much bad. They can be bad and nasty. If you're given the chance, they'll come out. If you think most people are decent, you would disagree. If you think most people are decent people, basically good, then you disagree. Okay, anyone else? 15 responses. Anyone else? Choose agree or disagree. All right. All right. So 15. All right. More of you agree. Okay. Keep track of your agrees. Next one, number 4. Generally speaking, people won't work hard unless they're forced to. You agree with that? Generally speaking, people won't work hard unless they're forced to. I tell you, I disagree because I know a lot of people work hard, even though we don't force them. My good students, all the good students, I don't force them to work hard, but they work hard on their own. Okay, anyone else? 15. Okay, here's what 15 of you said. All right, so most of you disagree on this one. Okay, let's go to the next one. Number 5. Anyone who completely trusts anyone else is asking for trouble. So what do you think of that? You're asking for trouble, too trusting. All right. Any other responses? I've got 14, 16. Great. All right. So 16 responses here. Where's we got? All right. Many of you agree with that. Okay. That could be partially true because there's scammers out there, right? Okay. Number 6. The biggest difference between most criminals and other people is that the criminals are stupid enough to get caught. Okay. So you think, all of us can be criminals. If you think most people are criminals, but we're not, we just don't get caught. Okay. Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay, I've got 15 respond. Here's what we got. All right. So most of you disagree. Great. 7. Honesty is not always the best policy. So what do you say to that? Anyone else? I've got 14. One more, maybe. Make it 15. Anyone? All right, got 15. All right. So here's what we got out of 22. Here's what we got 15. There. Okay. Many of you agree with that. All right. Number 8. The truth can be manipulated to serve your own ends. So you manipulate the truth in order to get what you want. Do you do that? Is that something you agree with? Something you do? Okay. Anyone else? 15, 16. All right, good. All right, here's what we got. All right, kind of 50-50 there, agree and disagree. All right, let's go to the next one. Number 9. When you ask someone to do something for you, it's best not to give the real reasons for wanting it. Instead, you should give the reasons which carry the most weight. Now, do you do this and you do agree with it? All right. 14, 15. Any more? 16. Okay. 16 people. Here's what you said. There you go. So more of you disagree with that statement. All right. Let's go to the next one. 10. It is wise to flatter important people, like your teacher. What do you think? 13. Couple more. Respond. 14. Anyone else? All right. Remember to keep track of your agrees. 15. All right. Let me show you what you said. There you go. All right. Most of you disagree with that one. Okay. Two more. Number 11. It's hard to get ahead without cutting corners here and there. So, what do you think? Hard to get ahead without cutting corners here and there. Okay, anyone else? I've only got 13 so far. Maybe a couple more would say answer. Just answer. Go ahead and answer. Okay, 14. Okay, I'll post it with 14. 50-50. Okay. All right. Last one. There's a sucker born every minute. What do you think? Sucker born every minute. All right. Any more? The 14. Any more? Okay, with 14 responses, here's what I've got here. All right, so a little bit more agree. Okay, now keep track, count up all the numbers you agree. Count up all the numbers you agree, and here's how you score it. And tell me what you score here. How Machiavelli are you? So are you A, 0, B, 1 to 4, C, 5 to 8, or D, 9 to 12? Okay. Okay, I need more of you to answer. Just count up, even if it's approximate. I've got 11 so far. I'd like to get more. Tell me what you chose. Okay. All right. Okay, so I've got, let me just, last chance, and I'll publish this poll. Okay. All right, out of 12 responses, here's what I got. Okay. So essentially, most of you are moderate. Okay. 5 to 8. Okay. Now, let me just say this. All right. Now, Machiavelli, again, he's the kind of guy who said people are essentially evil or bad, dishonest, and we can't trust people. So therefore, for you to get ahead, you yourself have to be dishonest or manipulative. You know what I'm saying? Not completely dishonest. So being open and honest in ethics, we advocate, you know, essentially being open and honest in our relationships, in business, and even in our personal lives. The reason is because if you are not generally open and honest, people can't trust you. If you are a person who lies a lot, or I can't trust you. Okay, if you hold back the truth, I can't trust you. So now sometimes we do have to hold back the truth. Sometimes we may have to use deception, because it is true. A lot of there are scammers out there. There are bad people out there, people who can take advantage of you. So those people we have to be on guard with. But in general, we have to try and say, okay, well, in general, I want to be trusting of people. Now, moderate is fine. That means you're moderate. You are wise in the way you use the truth. You don't want, again, you try not to be D. If you're really highly Machiavelli, people should not trust you, and you don't trust other people. And if you're in that situation, well, it's hard to have a good relationship. And in business, especially, I said, Warren Buffett is I really like him because he's the kind of guy who you can trust, and he only deals with people that he can trust. If he can't trust you, he just won't do business with you. Okay. Now, let me move on to some successful people. We think about, Elon Musk, Steve Jobs. They were highly successful people, and certainly you can't always trust these guys. So they were somewhat Machiavelli. Okay, so it is true. Some of the most successful people in the world, like Elon Musk and Steve Jobs, had some Machiavelli tendencies. You can't always trust what they say. And before them, there was Thomas Edison, who was also somewhat Machiavelli. So yes, some Machiavelli tendencies can help these people get ahead. But again, I prefer to use someone like Warren Buffett, who basically said, I operate in a very trusting way. I'm honest with you. I'm open with you. And if you don't operate that way with me, I won't do business with you. But let me show you, like someone like Thomas Edison. He was like the world's greatest inventor, even before Elon Musk and Steve Jobs. He had a rivalry. It says he was incredibly competitive and was said to do questionable things to ensure that his ideas went out and to make profit. I mean, he was a shrewd businessman. He wanted to make a profit. And he had a rivalry with this guy, Tesla. The car company is named after him. So, Tesla car company is named after this guy, Nikola Tesla. And Tesla was a scientist who developed what they call alternating current. On the other hand, Thomas Edison, he was a shrewd businessman who mass produced in order to make profits. Now, Thomas Edison, he advocated using DC. DC is a form of electricity. Tesla advocated using AC, alternating current. Now, if you know anything about electricity, the batteries, like on your computer, on your cell phone, they use DC, direct current. In direct current, you can't really electrocute yourself. If you touch the battery, you're not going to get a shock. But AC, on the other hand, is the current that you use if you plug something in. You plug something in, that current is AC. Now, some of you have made an accident. Now, you shouldn't do this, but if you accidentally touch the two prongs on the plug, you can get a shock. Okay, you could even electrocute yourself. That's also possible as well. So it can be very dangerous. So you never touch the two prongs when you plug something in. So Edison, he wanted to discredit Tesla. So he wanted to show people, don't use AC, because for him it wasn't profitable. He was using DC. He said, don't use AC, because Edison's company used DC, right? And said, don't use AC because it's dangerous. In order to convince people that AC was dangerous, he would do some crazy things like electrocute animals. One of the most famous electrocutions was Topsy the circus elephant. It says here, Topsy the elephant was electrocuted at Luna Park Zoo on Coney Island in 1903. Captured on film by Thomas Edison, the event was one of a string of animal electrocutions Edison staged to discredit a new form of electricity, alternating current. Okay, so for him, alternating current was not profitable because his company was using DC, direct current. And so he wanted to show people, don't use AC because it's dangerous. Look how it can electrocute animals. I mean, isn't that crazy? To electrocute animals, even a poor little elephant, in order to prove his point. But that's the kind of person he was. So in the end, we have to be careful. Doing anything in order to get profit is not a good thing. Now, in the 1970s, in 1970s, profit was still the main thing. It was still the main thing, right? As I told you, I went to university in 1970s and studied business, and we had nothing about ethics. Everyone was just thinking about profit because we followed what Milton Friedman said, who said, the only corporate social responsibility a company has is to maximize its profits. Okay. Now that's the old way of thinking about business. The old way of thinking about business is what we call the managerial view, or what we call shareholder capitalism. In other words, you're focused on the shareholder because a shareholder is the owners of a business, right? And so it makes sense that we would focus on them as the most important group, right? So yeah, sure, it made sense. But a new way to think about business as time went on is the more ethical way is, again, what we call the stakeholder approach, where we consider, shareholders are only one of many stakeholders. We need to consider other stakeholders. Okay, we need to consider other stakeholders. A couple of years ago, the top executives in America got together in what they call the Business Roundtable. So in the Business Roundtable, they got together to define the purpose of a corporation. Now, in this picture, I'm sure that you can recognize at least two of these people in this picture. If you can recognize one of these people, just type their names out, okay? See if you can recognize. I think we can get at least two people you recognize. Even if you don't remember their name, you can just tell me who they are. CEO of, anybody can recognize? In every class, I can get at least two faces that students will recognize. All right, you got it. You got it. Oh, right, exactly right. Jeff Bezos of Amazon. So there's Jeff Bezos right here, right? There's Jeff Bezos, right? Founder and chairman of Amazon. And then Tim Cook. He is the CEO of Apple, okay, who took over from Steve Jobs, right? This woman here is Mary Barra, CEO of General Motors, okay, and then the other is CEO of J.P. Morgan, the bank. So what it says here, it says chief executives from the Business Roundtable, including leaders of Apple and J.P. Morgan Chase, argue that companies must also invest in employees and deliver value to customers. And Business Roundtable redefines the purpose of a corporation to promote an economy that serves all Americans, because again, they're American companies and they were focused on Americans. But essentially what they're doing here, it says the updated statement moves away from shareholder primacy, shareholder as first priority. So they moved away from shareholder as the most important stakeholder to saying that we're committed to all stakeholders. So that's where ethics is taking us in corporations. We're moving away from giving profit to shareholders, because shareholders is profit driven, and we're focusing more on other stakeholders, such as the customer, okay, such as the suppliers, such as the employees, right, such as the community, such as the environment. And yes, we're still committed to shareholders, but we focus on profits. Profits is still important, but we focus on the long term. I give you an example, a personal example. Some years ago, my wife brought home a big box of strawberries, and she said, "Hey, look at this big box of strawberries. It only costs $5 from the store." I said, "Great, fantastic! What a great deal on the price." But you know what happened? When I took out the first row of strawberries, I found the bottom row was filled with moldy, rotting strawberries. Oh, Terrible. I couldn't even eat the top row because the top row had come in contact with the mold on the bottom. Completely useless. The $5 was completely wasted. So I took the box, I put it out in the backyard to give it to the animals. The next morning, even the animals didn't want it because it was just garbage. And so I just threw it in the garbage, right? So I take that as a point of saying, well, that store owner, he was seeking short-term profit. He was thinking, I could sell these strawberries for $5 and make a great profit. But he lost a lot of customers. I never went back to that store because I couldn't trust the guy anymore. I don't trust him. See, so trust is so important. So long-term, a business has to establish trust for long-term profitability. Okay. So when we think about, again, being dealing business honestly, building trust, that's what ethical businesses do. I think about Alphabet. Alphabet is the new name for Google, right? Google has changed the name to Alphabet. And when we think about Alphabet, we think about the founders of Alphabet. And Sergey Brin and Page, they said that, here was what they said. They said, don't be evil. We believe strongly that in the long term, we will be better served as shareholders and in other ways by a company that does good things for the world, even if we have to forego short-term gains. See, they look for the long term. So what I'm saying is great companies, ethical companies, focus on long-term profit. So Google founders said, even if we have to give up some short-term profits, we will hold to our principles. We want to do what's good for the world in order to focus on the long term. And so we're going to do a case right now, on a company called Merck. And Merck has this as their mission statement, okay? We are in the business of preserving and improving human life. Now, I'm a shareholder of Merck myself. I own their stock, okay? And of course, I want them to be profitable, right, as a shareholder, right? But they don't say their mission is to make money for Tom Eng, right? I want them to, right? Because, and of course, they're seeking to make money for me because I'm one of the shareholders. But their mission statement is that we are in the business of preserving and improving human life, okay? Because they're a drug company. And so I want you to think about this case here. Now, it's a long case. I'm going to just summarize it for you. Now, this took place in 1978, okay? Now, in 1978, okay, so here in 1978, all right, this fella here by the name of Vaglis, he was the head of the scientists. He was the supervisor for the scientists who developed drugs at Merck Laboratories, and he had one of his scientists come to him with an intriguing discovery. And so his name was Campbell. See, a scientist by the name of Campbell came to Dr. Vaglos, who was his boss, and says, listen, I might have, if you allow me to, I can pursue a possible cure for a disease called river blindness, okay? So he said that called river blindness. You see, the river blindness, okay? Now, this was a disease which afflicted millions of people in the third world, like in Africa, okay? And he says, I can, maybe if you allow me to, I can rework this animal drug, because Merck also worked with animals. And I can ultimately find a cure to cure river blindness for humans, all right? Now, river blindness was a terrible disease. In Africa and in other parts of the third world, poor people, the tribal people or villages, they would go to the river, and it says here in the third world, okay, 85 million people were thought to be at risk, okay, 35, and it was caused, this disease was caused by a parasitic worm, okay, which was transmitted by a black fly, okay, so what happened was these people, they would go to the river to, wash and to do farming, and they lived near the rivers, but they were being bitten, literally hundreds of times each day by these flies. And these flies, they carried parasites, and they would lay eggs underneath the skin of these people. And ultimately, these eggs would hatch, and they would hatch into worms, the larvae of these flies. And these worms would just swarm throughout the human body. Okay. It says here, these worms could grow up to 2 feet in length. That's long, 2 feet. We're talking long worms. So imagine these worms swarming throughout their body. It says it causes grotesque features on the skin, and it would cause terrible itching, so bad. It says here, terrible itching resulted, so bad that some victims even committed suicide. So it was so bad for some people, they even killed themselves. But the worst thing was that eventually these worms would get to the eyes and cause people to go blind. So they said the majority of people who were afflicted with this disease over the age of 45 were blind. So can you imagine just a terrible disease afflicted possibly up to 85 million people were at risk, and millions of people were already afflicted, and just terrible suffering, itching, suffering, going blind, a terrible disease. And imagine here you are, a scientist says, I might be able to develop a cure. So would you tell them to go ahead? See, the problem is this: it's not profitable. It's not profitable because these poor people who were afflicted by the disease didn't have any money. They couldn't pay for the drug. Okay, that's the problem. Okay, so the case goes on. It talks about Merck as a corporation. All right, it was one of the major drug companies in America, and it talks about here the problem of what they call the problem of rare diseases and poor customers. So, rare diseases means a disease is so rare, there's not enough customers to pay for it. So, therefore, drug companies had no incentive to make drugs to cure rare diseases. So, if it's a rare disease in the United States government would give money to these drug companies in order to develop the drug. So sometimes the government gives money, for emergency, just like for the COVID vaccine, the government gave money for the drug companies to develop a vaccine for the drug. So sometimes the American government will give money to the American companies to develop drugs. But in this case, the American government had no incentive to give money to these drug companies because hardly any American was afflicted by river blindness. It only afflicted people in Africa and other poor countries in the third world. Okay, so and these poor customers, again, they had no way of paying for this drug. Okay, so that's the problem because Merck is a corporation which has shareholders like myself. Do you develop the drug? So ultimately, the last paragraph says, I want you to imagine if you're Vaglos. Ultimately, it was Dr. Vaglos who had to make a decision whether or not to fund research toward the treatment for river blindness. Okay, so what do? It's not going to be profitable. So what am I going to do? And then my scientist says I can develop a cure. All right. So what are you going to do? River blindness is a terrible disease. Let me just show you a short video about river blindness. Let me see if I get the right video here. Let me show you just a short video on river blindness. So it's a minute video, and it tells you something about river blindness. So let's just watch it for a couple minutes here. Okay. Okay, so you can see it really is a terrible disease. So this American caught it because he went to Africa to do research, and so I want you to think about river blindness, and if you're vagless and you have a potential cure, what would you do? So if Dr. Vaglos, head of research, thought about this purely from the managerial point of view, so in other words, if you're thinking about this purely from being shareholder focused, shareholder focused, would you give permission to develop a cure? So would you say, let's cure it? Okay, what would you say? Knowing that people can't pay for it. Just choose your answer, A or B. Okay, any more? We only got 11 responses here. Go ahead and choose one. Go on. I can see your responses. Okay. And don't worry, if you get the wrong answer, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Okay. I just want you to participate. So go ahead and answer. Just pick it. Okay. All right. So let me show just on 11 responses, you got, all right. So more people would say no. Okay. That's the right answer. No. And the reason is because from the managerial point of view, you're only trying to make profit for shareholders. That's developing the drug, you only lose money. Okay. But if we take the new way, the stakeholder approach, are there other stakeholders that Merck needs to consider? Is there others besides the shareholder? If you can think of one or two, just type it. Just type it. Can you think of any other stakeholders besides the shareholder that Merck needs to consider? Okay. I think Grace, you were typing something? Is you had a opinion there? Okay. Yeah. Go ahead and just. Okay. Community investors. Yeah. Okay. Good. Good. All right. All right. So very good. And here are some of the stakeholders. Okay. Now, the investors include the shareholders, also people who are lending the money. Okay. Um, the community, we can, I think about the community, I would think about those afflicted with river blindness. So, we can think of 85 million people at risk for river blindness. Okay. So that's somewhat important stakeholder we have to consider. Think about this. We have the potential to help millions and millions of people. Are we going to do nothing? All right. The other thing to think about are the scientists, because the scientist is the one who came to you. You're supervising the scientists. You're Vaglis. You're the supervisor. So they're an important stakeholder. And remember, scientists are the ones who work on developing new drugs for a drug company, right? So if we think about it from the deontology point of view, we say that deontology considers the five core principles. And so the question is, does Merck have a special knowledge uh, it creates an obligation to act? If so, does it extend that obligation to spend between 100 and 200 million, which is a significant amount in 2000 in 1978 of its own resources to help? Okay, so I'm going to give you a multiple choice question in a minute, but the question is, okay, so we consider the five core principles, and yes, Merck has an obligation to act. Okay, The idea that, we have knowledge to help people, and we have to think about those suffering from river blindness, millions of people worldwide, and we can help them. We have an obligation. All right. And then we think about responsibility. This knowledge gives us a responsibility to do something. You learn that from Spider-Man. If you saw the movie, he says, with great power comes great responsibility. However, I would also say that it does not necessarily mean that Merck is responsible to spend its own money. There are other options. Okay. So here's the question I want you to answer. I'm going to give you some multiple choice questions. If you're vagless and you have this opportunity to help millions of people, to give them a cure for river blindness, what would you do? Okay. Would you A, say, nope, not going to develop the drug, it's not profitable? Or maybe B, I could share the discovery with others. Maybe I could give the information to the African government and they could develop it, right? Or maybe I'll just wait because perhaps other organizations like the World Health Organization might fund the research. I already told you the American government's not going to do it, but maybe the World Health Organization might do it. Or would you just say, we'll just develop it at a loss? We'll just take the loss. Okay, so I want you to. We've only got 9 responses. I want more of you. Come on. I can see who responds. All right. Okay. And I can see who doesn't respond. All right. So I don't care if you get the right answer or not. I just want you to respond. That's part of the participation mark. Remember, I'm giving you 1% for this. So I need you to participate. Participate by answering. Okay. 11. So I can see the 11 people who responded, and I can see those who did not respond. So I want you to respond. And participate. A few more. Okay. Any more? Come on, I want to give you a chance to participate. Okay. All right. Okay, let me show you the responses. We got 11. All right. So the vast majority chose B. Share the discovery with others. Now, I tell you this. It's interesting your answers because when I did this yesterday with my in-person class. Okay, and I asked, is anybody here from Africa? Now, interestingly, in my in-person class, I had 2 people from Africa. In my class this morning, it was online, nobody but it was from Africa. I'm just wondering, is there anybody here who's online? Are you from Africa? Okay, I had a question to ask you. If you are, just say so. Just say I'm from Africa. Anyone here from Africa? Okay, maybe no. All right. Now, I had 2 people from Africa in my class yesterday in person, and I asked them this question. I said, "Do you trust your government? In other words, do you trust the African government?" Okay, and the reason why I asked that is because the African government has a reputation for being corrupt. They take bribes, and they don't always do the right thing. So a lot of citizens do not trust the African government. And the two students said basically that they don't necessarily trust their government. Okay, it's not a good thing to say that, but that's the way it is. And so trust is so important. You can't trust the government, and so that's why B could be a problem with these students. They didn't choose B because if you share, they say I give the cure knowledge to the African government, but if it doesn't benefit the government, doesn't bring them any money, well, they probably will do nothing with it. Okay. I do another case with in Africa later in the recorded lecture. I talk about oil, and I said oil companies would benefit the African government, but the problem is the African government they take a lot of the profits and they keep it for themselves rather than using it for their citizens. See, so that could be the problem with B. C is possible. You can maybe wait for funding from the World Health Organization or develop the drug at Merck's expense. So let me just tell you what happened. Merck, Vaglos, basically, he was thinking about his own character. Okay, he used character ethics. Okay, and he had to think about the Merck mission statement. And he had to think about, how will the scientists view him? He was their supervisor. And remember, the mission of Merck is in the business of preserving and improving human life. If you tell a scientist your job is to make profit for guys like Tom Eng, the shareholder, well, that's not going to really motivate the scientists. That's not really going to motivate them. But what really motivates them is you can do something to change the world. You can do something to help other people. And so corporate culture at Merck nurtures the most creative and fruitful research. And Merck scientists were among the best paid and given the freedom to pursue new leads. So they were given the freedom. They said, find cures for diseases, develop new drugs, all right? And they were inspired to think of their work as a quest to alleviate human suffering and disease worldwide, okay? And they were inspired by what the founder's son said. In 1950, George Merck II, the founder's son, stated the company's philosophy. He says, we try to remember that medicine is for the patient, not for profits. The profits will follow. And if we remember that, they have never failed to appear. And the better we have remembered it, the larger they've been. So the philosophy was, we're not here just to make money. That's secondary. We're here to improve human life. We're here to help people with the drugs that we create. And if we focus on the patient, we focus on the people, the profits will follow. That was their philosophy. And that's what the scientists were inspired. They weren't inspired to say, oh, your job is to make as much money as possible. They were inspired to say, you are here to improve human life worldwide. And so you think about it, here's a case where a scientist, he says, I can potentially find a cure that will help millions of people suffering from a terrible disease. So what are you going to do? Are you going to give him permission to work on that cure? Okay. So essentially, yes. The answer is yes. So the answer is Merck decided to develop the drug at their own expense. Okay. See, Merck had special knowledge that no one else knew about. All right. And the suggestion to pursue the drug came from inside the company. It was related to existing research. They did try to find funding for elsewhere, but when no other option was available, they basically said, okay, we will develop it for free. We'll spend our own resources, we spend our own money, and we'll give it away for free. So Merck essentially was able to eradicate river blindness because this Vaglos allowed the scientists to develop the cure. Okay, so that's a great thing to do, right? Imagine if you're that scientist, you have the satisfaction of realizing, I alleviated suffering for millions and millions of people in the world. Oh, that's a great satisfaction that you could have. But, that's what, great companies focus on helping people, right? And, Merck is not the only company that did that. Here's during COVID, at the beginning of the pandemic, okay, now this was at the beginning in 2020, there were no treatments for COVID-19. So, back in 2020, if you caught COVID, you'd probably die. A lot of people died, okay? And because there was no drugs. Now, the first company to develop a drug was a company called Gilead Sciences, and they developed a drug called remdesivir. Now we don't use it anymore because we've got a lot better drugs now. But back then, that was the only drug available to treat COVID-19. That's after you caught it, right? So what did they do? They said, well, the CEO said, we've donated the entire supply that we have within our supply chain. We did that because we acknowledge and recognize the human suffering, the human need here. And we want to make sure that nothing gets in the way of this getting to the patients. Okay, so this was back in May of 2020, when the height of the pandemic. And so again, great companies and like drug companies, they know that we're here to improve and we're here to alleviate human suffering, and that's what we need to do, not just to make a profit. Profit is secondary. Okay, so again, that's ethics in corporations. Profit is important, but it comes when we do what's most important, which is to do our for drug companies to develop drugs to treat patients. And that's the major focus, and the profits will follow. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the Milgram experiment that you've just done. Okay, you've done the Milgram experiment. Okay, now when Milgram did it in the 1960s, the original Milgram experiment only tested men. Okay, now the ABC News remake that you watched tested both men and women. Okay, now I want to ask you this question: would women, do you think, be more likely to stop shocking than the men? Do you think women would? A, no, men and women are pretty much the same. Or would you say B, yes, women tend to be more empathetic than men? Or would you say C, no, more women than men would continue shocking to the highest level? So what do you say to that? More responses, please. More responses. More responses. Okay. All right. So out of 11 responses, all right, here's what we said. Most of you said B. Yes, women tend to be more empathetic. Some of you said A. Men and women are pretty much the same. And a couple of you said C. Would you want to, would you want to tell me either verbally or you could type out why would you say women more than men would continue shocking the highest level? Why would you say that? Anybody want to say why? A couple of you said that. Okay. All right. See what your response is. Niyati is typing. See what you said. Okay. Let me see what you have to say. Go ahead, Niyati. We're waiting for your reason. Okay. Women do have that capability, power in suffering and pain, but men, on the other hand, has more suffering power. Interesting. So you think women have power but men, on the other hand, more suffering power. So you think men are would be more empathetic, perhaps, maybe. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that, but I think that's how I read it. But all right, let me ask one other question here, and I'm going to show you a segment of the video here. Okay, so the people who said no, I will not continue. What qualities are present in the person who will stop shocking the learner, even when the scientist says, please continue? Okay, so would you say A, compassionate and caring, B, non emotional and confrontational, or C, easygoing and agreeable? What would you say? So the person who says no. Okay, any other responses? All right. So out of 11, let me just show you what you said. Most of you did choose A, compassion and caring. And that's why many of you think maybe women would stop shocking the learner sooner than men, right? Because women are more compassionate, they're more empathetic, they're more caring. Okay, so let's see what happens. And you know, the scientist talks about this idea, you know, of women and men. First of all, let's take a look at one of the women and how she responds. She actually does continue to shock to the highest level of 150 votes. Okay. Um, so let's just take a look at how she responds here. Okay. And why she did it. Okay. So you saw this first part. Okay, so you see what so she did actually go to the highest level, and and she did ask. She said, well, that guy says he's a heart problem, and the scientist says, well, if anything happens to him, I am responsible, right? And she said that's what I needed to know. So interesting, you know, people who are willing to shock to the highest level don't take responsibility for their actions. In other words, as long as I'm not blamed, I will continue to shock. All right. They don't like it, but as long as you don't blame me. All right. Now, so that was a woman. And let me just skip here to what the scientists said about the differences between men and women here. Okay, listen to what he says. Okay, you see, you know, I think a lot of you, I was surprised too, that women, the actual answer is women more than men. 73% of the women, 65% of the men. So women more than men continue to shock to the highest level. Now, I find that interesting. Can anyone tell me, what do you think? What is the reason for that? The scientist talks about it later, but what do you think is the reason that women, even though some women were quite emotional, okay, you mentioned they were empathetic, and that was true. I'm not going to show it, but there was one woman who said, I can't continue if I hear this man screaming, and I can't continue. And yet she continued. All right. So, why do you think? Yes, some women were more empathetic, uh, but yet they continued to shock to the highest level. Is there? Can you guess or reason why you think women, even though some were more empathetic, like the woman I showed you was not that empathetic, but there was some women who were very empathetic. Can anyone guess? No? Okay. Well, let me just tell you. See, basically, all right, what the scientists theorized was that in our society, okay, things are changing now. Okay, it probably the result would have been different maybe years ago, but things are changing even more now. See, in our society, women and men are quite equal. However, still historically, women are not uh, able to say no as easily as men are. Okay, in other words, women are tend to be more, subservient. They tend to be more submissive because as again historically, women have been below men. Again, we're changing that now, but worldwide, women tend to be below men, and women have a harder time to say no. Okay, and so even though some of the women were very emotional, they felt very bad about shocking the learner. Still, they listened because they were not assertive. They had a hard time saying no. Okay, so that brings me, what is the qualities of the person who's willing to say no? Let me just show you the last segment here. The guy who did say no, and what were his qualities? Okay, watch. Okay, so there's the guy who walked out, who said, I won't continue. Can you tell me what quality he had? What do you think he had? No? Okay, I'll wait for the answers here. Confrontational, caring. Well, I don't know if he was that caring. He didn't show that emotional, that caring emotion. Concerned, okay. Okay. Willing to disobey rules. Yeah. Yeah. Concern. Okay. Yeah. Good answers. Non-emotional and confrontational. Yeah, exactly. That was one of the choices I gave. Non-emotional. See, because they said, at the first sign of pain, when the guy said, "Oh," his face showed no emotion. So you would have thought, oh, this guy doesn't care, right? He doesn't care because he doesn't even show any emotion, right? But when it came down to it, he said no. Okay. And so, we often think, empathy is important. It really is. But also, we need the fact that we need to be willing to be, well, the word is assertive. That means willing to speak up for what's right. And that's, Grace said, willing to disobey was willing to say no. And so he's willing to do that. See, most of the time, most of us are agreeable people, and that's great. Most of the time, it's good to be agreeable. To get along with your teacher, it's good to be agreeable with me because I like that, right? Your boss at work, it's good to be agreeable because if you're not agreeable, you get fired, right? If you're always arguing and confrontational with everybody, you're not going to have any friends, right? So most of the time, it's good to be agreeable. But sometimes when it's a big issue, like in this situation of right and wrong, hurting somebody, you have to be willing to say no. So I think the most important lesson I've learned from this, especially if you're a woman, there's nothing wrong with saying no. And we don't say no all the time, but when the time is right, when you have to say no, don't be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid to confront when it's right. Okay, so that's an important lesson to learn to be a better and more ethical person. Okay, it's good to be emotional, but it's also important to be able to say no when you need to. Okay, so that.